Hello, hello. Welcome to the final panel of this year's STF Conline, and we've got a good one for you today. We have a great lineup of professionals. They may disagree with me, but I'm going to tell you, you guys are all professionals here to discuss writing adventures. We're going to do our best to keep the system, to keep this discussion system agnostic. Though, of course, all of our experiences will inform this discussion. So let me introduce you to the panel. First, we have Jason Tondreau, a senior designer from Wizards of the Coast. Can you just give me a little brief rundown of your experience?
Sure, yeah. I started about in this business professionally about 6 years ago. I've been freelancing for longer than I care to admit, and I started at Paizo with Jenny and Eleanor. Jenny hadn't started there yet, but Eleanor had. I was an editor there for about a year and a half. I became a Starfinder developer. I did that for a couple of years, and then I became a senior developer working on both Pathfinder and Starfinder. And then surprisingly quickly after I got that promotion, Wizards put out a call for positions, and I moved over. And I've been at Wizards of the Coast. I made the Deck of Many Things. It was my first project there. And the making of Dungeons and Dragons book that just came out was my second.
Cool. Well, thank you for being here, Jason. Next up, we have Eleanor Farron. She is a senior developer at Paizo as well. Tell me a little bit about what you kind of have your fingers in.
Yeah, well, assuming I can actually talk to you about that, because publishing is a cruel mistress, I work on the Pathfinder Lost Omens books, which are the setting books for Pathfinder's World of Golarion. Most recently, we put out Tianxia World Guide, which is based on Asian fantasy and is Emmy nominated if y'all feel like voting for it.
Congratulations.
And, before that, just other things like the travel guide for putting a lot of niche flavor into your settings. And I've also dabbled my toes in adventure writing. I've had half of a hand in the free RPG day, Fistful of Flowers. I wrote the Little Trouble in Big Absalom, which lets you play as kobolds in a grandmother's basement. And I've written some adventure paths, including one that may have disintegrated one of my favorite podcast characters.
Yeah, well, we've given you enough grief about that. We don't have to talk about it anymore. Thank you for being here, Eleanor. Jenny.
Hey.
She's a senior developer for Paizo, focused mostly on Starfinder. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
So I've been freelancing and doing like volunteer stuff for various, tabletop events, probably for like 10 years. I think I've been freelancing for almost 10 years now, which is weird to think about. And I got hired at Paizo full time about 4 years ago. And at Paizo, I started as the Starfinder Society developer, so working on the organized play branch. So primarily I was doing a lot of short adventures that have kind of a connecting meta plot to them. So definitely a lot of what I've written for Paizo and for other companies are adventures. So I feel like that was kind of my specialty, and then moved over to the Starfinder team fully to be one of the AP developers. And as it stands now, as a senior developer, I work on kind of a little bit of everything in the Starfinder team. So the latest project that I led was Mechageddon, which is the Starfinder First Edition finale. Please check it out. It is super fun if you like big stompy robots and wild space shenanigans. It's a lot of fun. And then Starfinder Second Edition is kind of the big thing that I and the rest of the team are focused on right now, is just trying to launch this new fully compatible version with Pathfinder 2. So that's me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here as well. So the first thing I want to do is kind of define what we're talking about here, right? So what makes adventure writing different from other forms of creative writing? Like what are some of the things that make it unique and specific that's different from other types of writing? And I'll push that to all of you.
I'm gonna wait for Jason here, because he's got the most analytical mind of us all.
Oh my God, that's so not true. Adventure writing is not creative writing. when you're creative writing, you're telling a story. But when you're writing an adventure, what you're really doing is giving the tools for that story to the GM so that they can tell it to the players. A good example of the difference. Let's say that you got a character with a secret motivation, like they have some secret scheme that they're up to, some plot, right? Some hidden agenda. A common mistake in adventure writing is to wait to tell the GM about that secret agenda until it's suddenly revealed when the players learn it at the climax. That's a mistake. That's how you would do it if you were writing it as a novel, right? Mm-hmm. What you really want to do is you want to put that secret agenda in the very beginning, the very first paragraph of the adventure. Here's the villain's secret agenda, so that the GM can then play that character in a right way and can react to changes when the players go off script, which they will always do, right? Mm-hmm. So when players do something that's not in your written adventure, you can now react properly because you know what the NPC secret agenda is, right? Like that. So that's just one example, but it's really more like technical writing than creative writing. But Eleanor and Jenny.
The professor, you're the one with published books and the doctorate, man. But yes, and one thing to remember is that even your story, even though your players have consented to playing that story, it's not the focus. The players are the focus. And anything you put in there, they may not react to it all. They may not care about it at all. They may try their hardest to get away from the plot that you have set down. And I mean, it's your job to try and make them want to engage with that plot. But at the same time, you have to recognize, the characters in creative writing, of course, you want to really flesh out these characters. You want to really deep dive into all their motives and all of, verbal tics, that kind of thing. And that can be useful for GMs, but you're probably not even going to have the space, to be honest. And they're not the stars of the show. In fact, if the PCs get into the combat with them, they're probably going to live for about 30 seconds, and that's it. It's understanding that you're here to facilitate the story of your players' characters, and that involves adapting on the fly. And sometimes that means when you're adventure writing, you don't put as many details in as some people may want, but that's just how it is. You are not the GM. It's the GM's job to bring the things that you have put on the page to life. And so sometimes excess detail is not a good thing for that even. But it's understanding that, like Jason said, this is a toolkit. You can't have every possibility mapped out. And honestly, you shouldn't be. This adventure should be a personal experience for both the GM and the players.
Jenny, you have anything to add there?
They basically stole everything I would have said. But other than that, the other thing too is just like going along with, you're not writing a novel or a short story or a script. So it is different. You also have to understand too, when you're writing an adventure, I feel like the difference really is that when you describe something, it all has to have a purpose, and it has to have a thing it can do. And by that, I mean a way that it interacts with players' character sheets and a way that players can use their character sheets to interact with it. So if you have any kind of environmental, there's a storm or something, or I don't know, there's like a chasm in the middle of this dungeon. Okay, well, there needs to be some mechanical things behind that, because people are going to want to climb it, jump it, rappel down, see what's at the bottom of it. You can't just say this really cool description thing and let it stand on its own, because the players are going to want to go poke their finger in it immediately. So when you're adventure writing, you kind of have to realize that every little thing you mention is probably going to, it might either, as Eleanor said, the players may not care at all about the thing that you lovingly crafted, but they might also just zero in on this random detail that you just added in. And so just knowing that, people are going to interact with this is the big thing. The big
random detail, random NPC. There was a meme going around RPG Twitter a while back where somebody is just like, the GM accidentally describes it as, there's a red paperweight on the desk. And there's like a picture of a billion chickens like poking this red faucet just to show you what's going to happen if you do that. Because if you give too much detail about something, everyone is just going to It's like,
Well,
now
yeah,
you
they
caught my
assume
interest.
they assume it matters, right? Well, okay, so you guys are talking about this as it's just technical and just mechanics, but the reality is that there are stories that are presented
Sure.
throughout these adventures, but there are no protagonists, which makes any traditional storytelling arc non-existent, because the protagonists are the players, and that's the interaction part that you're talking about. Yet you still have to like set up this world and this general arc of an adventure that gets the players interested in whatever the narrative thrust is going to be, so the biggest thing for me that I've written a few small adventures for my cast, but like I also knew the players and the characters, and so I wrote it for them, right? Like, and so I had a good insight of what they were going to want to do. But if we're writing an adventure for anybody to play and any character they bring, how do we write that without a protagonist?
I mean,
What are some of the things that you do to kind of structure it to leave room for protagonists while still having we got point A, point B, point C to get to on the narrative side of it?
some of it's just going to come down to the sale pitch of the overall adventure. And even that won't stop some people from complaining. It's like, if you drop down to an adventure, it's like you're all paladins fighting demons, and it's like, well, why didn't you also write this adventure so that we could be siding with the demons and ruining all these paladins' efforts? Like, because we got a limited page count, get out of here with that. That's not the pitch of the adventure. Same with Strength of Thousands. There's a lot of people who are like, well, I don't want to play a magical student at this adventure about playing a magical student in a magical school. It's like, get out of here with that. Go talk that with your GM.
Yeah.
But usually the sales pitch is a way of getting people on board just to start with. If they're not interested in the premise of the adventure, then don't run that adventure. But past that, I want to say that we are slightly more considerate than just shooting spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks for various people. But it doesn't hurt, It doesn't hurt to have a lot of variety of different things in any adventure that PCs can take or leave as they encounter them. And some people it's going to be hit, some people it's going to be miss, and that's okay. You're not interested in everything you encounter in your everyday life.
The first off, when you say that you wrote these for your home game, like, that's the way to do it. Like, if you can write them for your home game and you know who the players are and you know what they want, write to your audience. And if you can do that, do that. That is easier and better, and it's more successful. But if you can't do that, if you are writing, I want to go back to your original statement. You said there are no protagonists. Okay, there are protagonists. They're just ciphers, right? Okay. The protagonists are the PCs. You just, as a writer, you don't know anything about them.
Right.
So what do? You create the hook in part one that you then tug on in part two. So, for example, you create, let's talk about, let's use Fly for Your Die as an example.
Okay.
Right? So you create this helpful NPC who helps the PCs out, getting them jobs, and you establish that friendship early in the game, so that 2 volumes later, when she needs help, you can rely on the PCs to want to help her. You see,
right.
Because you've created that hook that you can then tug on 60 pages later, right?
Right.
And Eleanor is absolutely right. Like, there is a certain sort of theme park ticket to how we write adventure paths. Like, okay, this is the magic school adventure path. So everybody make a character who's at a magic school. Like, there's a buy-in. And if the players buy into it, then they'll generally go along with it. I mean, there's always exceptions and stuff. But that we, as writers, we do rely on that. We do rely on player buy-in to make these adventures work.
So, yeah. So in a perfect setting. We have this adventure. All the players come excited to do that adventure and what that adventure wants. And then what I'm hearing from you, Jason, is that in order to move the adventure down the narrative path, you have hooks that you can reasonably rely on somebody who's bought into this adventure to pull on, right? Like, so like, you can't write an adventure for somebody who's going to be antagonistic to the adventure. That's what can you do about that? That's that person's decision. But the biggest thing that I think about when I'm like, okay, well, I wrote these 2 adventures, they were pretty successful. What if I want to write something that I could give to any table to play?
Yes.
How do those hooks impact a group of players that I don't know? And so I think using the fly for your die example with Tarika is a really good. You have this NPC that you are asking the players to buy into at the beginning so that you can use that NPC or whatever hook it might be later on to continue to propel forward.
Yeah.
Well, of course, your podcast did that with Sedona and against the Aeon Throne. Everybody bought into that NPC because you asked them to, but she became, a big critical part because of that connection.
Okay, so Jenny, do you have anything to add to this question?
Yeah.
I promise I'll let you go first next time. So
it's fine. It's fine. I'm enjoying and just kind of nodding along with most of what's being said. I think the hooks too, like just to go further into that, like I know a lot of published adventures will use like some kind of an adventure primer, toolbox, character guide, whatever they call it. Those are great. You can do them for your homebrews. You can do them if you're writing professionally, or you're trying to get those published. Those are great because that's the first hook, and it could be a character. It could be, every character needs to decide what their relationship is to this character and why they care about this NPC and why they will keep, interacting with them. But there's other options too. So like the magic school, okay, what kind of student are you? Like figure that out. Like you have to be a student. Sorry, like that's the point. And Mechageddon did something like that as well, because the premise of Mechageddon is that you are mech pilots who have just trained and you're entering like a defense force that protects a city from like these huge colossi. And so yes, you're going to be in a pseudo military force or a militaristic force, but there are we tried working on that. I tried to consider different types of characters. Like what would a pacifist do? Like what if someone really wants to play a pacifist in Mechageddon? Like what if they really want to be like, the Basra and Macross, who's like, I just want to play my guitar and I'm not going to fight anything and I'm just going to be here. And so I tried to consider like, well, maybe, why else could you get involved in this besides literally just, I am signing up to join the military. And so there are some other hooks that have to do with, why you're a contractor or you're in this for some other reason, or you got like, I don't know, you messed around too much in the city and they're like, all right, well, you got to straighten out. So there's a lot of options. And I think that if you are writing an adventure, just try to consider what vastly different types of characters might interact with it. But again, they're going to have to buy, if there's a very strong theme in the adventure, they're going to have to buy into it, or they're probably not going to have as much fun playing it.
Can I talk about Mechageddon for another minute?
Yeah, sure. Always.
So I was reading, I saw the book on the shelf. I turned it over and I was reading the back cover copy. And you did this thing where you showed that the player characters become celebrities over the course of the adventure. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, that is right.
This is another great example of showing the reader what they're going to get, right? Showing the players what they're going to get. Like, okay, we're not spoiling anything, but as you make a character, be aware that, you've got this sort of pop culture celebrity status maybe coming in the future. So make a character that will fit with that. And that kind of signposting is super helpful for the players and the GM.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, so I guess like taking away something from here too is that you can have a variety of hooks into your adventure, but you as a player have to take a hook that makes sense into that adventure, right? So at the end of the day, you still have to be somebody that signs up to be in a mech to stop the Colossi. There's a lot of different reasons why a person might do that. And, as an adventure writer, you try to make room for that, right? But what you can't make room for, or maybe what you shouldn't. And I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, just kind of processing what I'm hearing is that you can't be expected to have a hook into this adventure that's antithetical to the adventure. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, okay, well, if you want to play somebody who's on the side of the Colossi, here's how you join them.
Right.
You know, like that's not, you know, like, or if you want to play somebody who really has beef with the Aslanti, maybe you should play a different adventure that focuses on that rather than this. But if you have somebody that has these feelings about the Aslanti and it informs who they are when it comes to an oppressive world, maybe they can convert that into taking it out on the Colossi or something like that. But it's more making room for variety while still putting some parameters into place that this is how we enter this story. And if we enter this story with those parameters, then the story, we can tell it with some basic assumptions about what the party is and what their motivations are. That's fair kind of assessment, pull away. Good.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we aren't. All three of us aren't really writing for the old school kind of gaming where it's just the players versus the GM. This is a cooperative storytelling effort, and if somebody's not cooperating with the story you're trying to tell, then it's just not gonna work.
Yeah, it's not a PvP game, and it shouldn't be outside of the game. It shouldn't be PvP either, right?
Right.
It is very much, and this is the kind of thing that you can do in a session 0, right? Like you can kind of get everybody around the table and talk about what this game is going to be, and Eleanor's point about or was it Jenny? I forget which one of you were talking about the I guess it was Jenny, the adventure, like the player guides that we often create for these adventures. And like the hooks that you were talking about like, you know, Adam, about how to get characters to do what you want to do. Those are often in the player guide. Like, you know, you think about Fly, Fear, or Die. We said, okay, you are this character's sister. You have an old experience working with this character, right? And all those hooks we built in so that we could pull them later on in the adventure.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I have quite a few listener questions that they submitted, some really good ones. So I want to give an opportunity to get these asked. So this one comes from Shan, and they ask what, and it kind of ties into what we're talking about here. What are the best ways to prepare for that unpredictability of the players? How much of that goes into consideration when you write an adventure?
Oh gosh.
I'm going to start with Jenny this time.
Oh, good.
Start you on a hard one.
Yeah. So for me, there's a couple of strategies to this, and my colleagues here might have other strategies. So one of the strategies that I like to use a lot is assuming that they won't get every hook or find every plot already, like, not to mention they might want to totally just run off in the other direction and do something. So yeah, I'll try to include like the variety of, okay, if you're really tired of the main plot, like here's a fun little bar, like we mentioned, there's a tavern down the road, or there's some kind of cool thing where you can go, like there's a festival going on in the city, like go check that out for a minute. And you know, that's something to kind of like give them that break valve. But what I try to do is just make sure that multiple paths can lead to kind of the same place in the end. Like they might have a different view, like different scenic views getting there, but it's going to go to the same place because, again, with a published adventure, you're probably not going to have time to write like a full sandbox where it's like here's like 100 different paths. Mm-hmm. It's not going to happen. Like I promise you. So the best, like I said, the best way is have like 3 or 4, like or maybe less. I don't know, but a couple branches that are going to have some different details, but somehow they're going to end up in the same place. Like I try to anticipate if this person if they just really run off in the other direction, how can they be hooked back in? Like what event could happen and get them back to on the rails, so to speak, as we talk about the railroad. Do y'all have any other thoughts on that?
I mean, some of it's just experience of playing with some real perverse players. Once you play with them for long enough, you sort of get a sense of how they're gonna try and screw up your adventure, or what kind of weird questions they're gonna be poking at or asking or doing, and you can kind of preempt that. I mean, as Jenny said, you're gonna run out of space. You don't. when you're writing an adventure, don't focus too much on the idea that somebody is going to not want to play your adventure. You are wasting space, you're wasting everyone's time, you are probably making the adventure worse. Um, it's something that's going to be on the head of the GM, and that's just going to be how it's going to be, because the GM is the one that knows the group and knows how to wrangle them, hopefully. I mean, there's a big question mark there, but ultimately it cannot be your job to predict everything. We don't have the same space as Baldur's Gate 3 here. That was a lot of gigabytes, and our PDFs do not match up with that. You just have to, I mean, be on your toes, advise the GM in limited fashion, and I mean, just kind of hope that these people actually want to play the adventure.
So, very broadly, let's divide adventures into location-based adventures and story-based adventures. In this location-based adventure, you have like a map, and the characters are exploring that map. And it could be anything. That could be anything. It could be a spaceship, it could be a desert, it could be an underground tomb, whatever. Story-based adventures are where player improv really can pose challenges. In a location-based adventure, it's not that big of a deal. Like, the players can go wherever they want on that map, and as long as you know what's in every location, you're fine, right? And if they explore it counterclockwise or they explore it clockwise, it doesn't really matter. I mean, in theory, it might, but
teleport through the wall.
yeah. But if adventures in that sense are basically a flowchart, right? And they can go left and fight the orcs, or they can go right and fight the dragon. But like, it's you have control. But a story-based adventure, where it's not about the map, it's about events that occur. That's where player improv and going off the rails becomes much more challenging. And my advice in that situation is to have a very clear schedule of what your antagonist is doing and when. So, like, okay, this is the villain's plot, and he's going to do X and Y and Z. And the players can, like, sort of flip around, like, they can kind of, and as long as if they go off the rails, or they go start exploring other things, they get distracted by a subplot or whatever, that's kind of okay, because you know what the next gate is. And this is what Jenny was talking about. Like, these sort of, if you think about an adventure, it can kind of go out like this, but then it comes back and it hits a gate. There's like some important event that you know is going to happen. And then they can go out and then go out again, and they can screw around and they can play around, but eventually they're going to come back to that next gate. And those gates are whatever it is that your adversary is doing to make the plot move forward, right? And as long as you know what that's going to happen, then, the players have gone off to, some other city. And you're like, okay, well, you find out that X just happened because the villain's next milestone just occurred. And that sort of drags everybody back to the plot, and assuming that they care about what's going on. That's another issue.
Yeah, I mean, so go ahead, Eleanor.
I mean, it's sort of ghost ring up right now, but you can always feel free to fling the plot at your characters if they sort of lost track of it, kind of in the same way like how Franz Ferdinand managed to avoid being assassinated, and then the assassin just ran into him at a sandwich shop. I mean, it seems hackneyed, but it really happens. So you can, if the players just sign up for just like if the players aren't actively avoiding your plot, but maybe kind of got sidetracked for something, you can always feel free to have the plot crash in, shooting a gun, much like a Raymond Chandler antagonist.
Okay, I got another question for you guys. This one comes from Jason. It says, how high is the pressure to be original in your adventure writing, whatever that means to you? What sells better? Something that's really pushes the boundaries, or something that's easier to latch onto?
That's a great question.
I mean, I'm not going to claim to be very creative, but I do know that I sometimes don't care for standard adventuring templates or plots, and I also know that my adventures get a lot of really hot and cold reviews. So I'm gonna say it's a mixed bag, and honestly, you probably can't go wrong just doing standard adventure and stuff, because I think more people are gonna like that.
People will, but that like, but again, as Eleanor said, like she gets the hot and cold reviews. There's some hot reviews, like it's not for everyone, but like if you there's also the school of, if you just know what you really want to write and and you don't, it's not as much of a problem to you if it's not the most popular thing, like you can put it out there and there will be people that love it. Like I don't know. We'll see. Like the Mechageddon sales, however that goes, we'll see in the future. But all I know is every time I say it, there's like 5 people that are like, and I'm just like, yay. So like, I don't know. Maybe not everybody loves it, but some people do.
Maybe it's just those 5 people.
Maybe,
see you.
But I'm happy for them. So thank you. Like you make me happy. But
I mean, there's always going to be pressure to be standout because that's just how society works. But truth of the matter is somebody's probably done it, and the more you read and look into things, the more you're going to realize that. So just try not to let it get to you. Just put it out of your mind as much as you can.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, and I'm glad that it got asked because if your goal is sales, you're always going to be heartbroken in this business. Right? Like the number of quantities, just the number of copies that we sell in this business is so small. That being said, if you're learning the craft, then yes, start with something simple. Do like a little, 1 map dungeon crawl. Like do the basics, right? Learn, but once you've done that, as soon as you feel like you can, do what Jenny and Eleanor have said, which is write your truth. Don't write the adventure to sell. Write the adventure that you want to write. Find your passion and write your truth, because that is the only and best reward of this industry. Seeing the thing that you make come out and people can get it and play it and even review it, and you can, like that is why we do this. And so I think chasing sales is kind of a fool's game, and I strongly urge our listeners not to buy into it.
Yeah, I hope your boss isn't watching this.
Well, look, to that point, as a consumer of these adventures, right, and as somebody who's using these adventures to then turn around and make our own kind of creative project with it, I want to talk about something like Signal of Screams, which is very, very specific adventure, right? And a lot of people probably see it and are like, that's not for me. I don't want to do the grisly horror thing or the like internal struggles.
It's a great example of the love it or hate it adventure. Yes.
But I think if you had asked anybody in STF before we ran that adventure what their feelings about doing a horror adventure was. I mean, I did ask them in our session 0. I was like, this is what we're going to do for season 2. And there was a lot of like uncertainty and, well, horror's not really my bag. It's not something I'm really into. And, but I had read the adventure, and while it was definitely outside of my typical wheelhouse, that was part of why I wanted to do it, especially as our second season, to challenge not only the players, but the characters that are in this story. And I think it turned out to be, I think all of us would say that was our favorite season of the APA, because it was different and it did challenge us, and it challenged our notions of what a role-playing game story is and can be, And I mean, it inspired me to write one of those adventures that I was talking about. Like I wrote a whole secondary adventure that existed within the Signal of Screams world because I was just inspired by it. So like all that to say, I think that the answer to that question is what you guys have said, and it's write your truth, because somebody will connect to it if it's authentic to you.
That's right.
You know what I mean? If it feels forced, it's going to play forced, as a consumer. That's kind of where
I mean, your best adventure. So I'm gonna say something a little unpopular. Is like once you reach a certain level, you sometimes discover that even when you're when you're phoning it in and when you're really enthusiastic about something, people don't always tell the difference. That's something people don't like to hear necessarily. I think a lot of authors understand it though, and it's usually because something that they did not like became really, really popular. Um, and of course, there's always economic issues. Like we gotta eat. So you always have to balance. Do we think this is gonna be a popular thing? And if not, are we gonna counterbalance it with something we think will be popular? And not. I mean, we don't always know what's going to be popular. You never can. I mean, Season of Ghosts, which is another horror adventure, seems to have taken off, and we don't know why. I mean, it's a good adventure, but we don't go out to publish bad adventures. I mean, we don't know what's clicking with this particular one, but people seem to like it, and we just have to do what sounds fun and see how people react, and we can't always predict it.
I mean, that's part of any creative work, right? Like, as a musician, sometimes we'll play a show and we'll get off stage and be like, that was trash, right? And then everybody's like, that was one of the best shows you guys have ever played. And I'm like, when that happens, it's just like such.
It throws everything you know about reality.
Like, what? I don't understand. I don't understand. Like, was I not there? But yeah, so I think that's inherent in any kind of creative pursuit, especially something that you then are monetizing in a way that that you are trying to bring some sales to. And as much as you don't want to be what you're chasing, like Jason said, the fact of the matter is, if that is your profession, that is part of what your metrics are, what you're measured to, and
yeah. And I don't want to. You're right, and I appreciate that, because I don't want to disregard the point of the question. If you are in the business to make sales, if that's why you're here, if you're here to write adventures, to do numbers, then figure out what audience you want to specialize in, and build that audience, right? So if you want to be the old school dungeon crawl person, or you want to be like the all social adventure where like every adventure you write can be solved completely without violence, or whatever your thing is, right? Like, find out who those people are and write for them. I don't want to get all English professor here, but when Shakespeare's patron, Queen Elizabeth, died, he had to find a new patron. He needed a new boss to sign the checks, and King James was coming down to become the new king of England. And all Shakespeare knew about James was that he had an infamously short attention span. He loved to watch fights, and he'd written a whole book about how to hunt and chase witches. So what did Shakespeare do? He wrote his shortest play ever with the most fights per minute, and he starts off with witches, right? Like, he wrote the play for the man, and it worked. James became his new patron, and from there on, he was the king. They were the king's men, right? So if it's good enough for Shakespeare, it's good enough for us.
Fair enough.
I will say, if you're trying to make sales, put a dragon on it.
Put a dragon on it?
Yeah.
People buy things with dragons on it.
I also will say, because originality was invoked, originality is also kind of an illusion. Like, there's going to be original things, and there's going to be original new combinations, but like Eleanor said earlier, if you have a new idea, chances are someone's done something like it before. So, there's only, I don't know, I feel like there's only so many ideas and everything across, like, depending on our different, like, cultures. We all have so many that we have in the tank, and we can do them differently, but just don't, I don't know. I don't feel too much of that pressure, because I don't think I can do anything that's just never, ever been done in any way. Like, I might have some new stuff in it, but I try not to fall into that trap, and I urge you all not to fall into that trap either, because it's okay.
It's not about the idea, it's about your execution of it.
Right, exactly.
Like your voice, your style, that's what's going to make it
100%. Like, between this and being a musician, my wife is an artist, the concept of originality in art gets brought up in a lot of my conversations. And one of the things that I have come to realize is that originality doesn't matter near as much as authenticity does. And so like you can tell a story that's not fresh, but you have a passion for it. That passion is what brings the freshness to it. It's, and that's so much more important than trying to subvert expectations just for the sake of subverting expectations, like, because there's 12 notes in a scale. There's those are the 12 notes in a scale. And the same thing for writing. There are tropes that exist for a reason, because this is what makes a cohesive narrative, and so when anybody asks me about originality, I'm like, that's a lie. Be authentic to yourself, and that's really what's most important, and that's what shines through, I think. But let's talk about something that is specific to the way that you all write adventures, because you all write adventures that are in an established canon. And so this question comes from Elisa Ellie, and she asks, how do you, when you're working within an established canon, how do you work to avoid inconsistencies within that world? What resources are most helpful with that?
Well, you're gonna have to do a lot of research about that world, basically.
You're gonna have to know the world, huh?
Well, yeah, it helps. I mean, with Paizo especially, it's like, well, if we're jumping off a previous plot hook, then you go and you find all the books that involve that plot hook, and you sit down and you read them, and even then you might muck something up because we have a really big world and a lot of canon, and so does Wizards of the Coast, honestly, which is why we have a team of editors and stuff to catch that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We often forget that research is part of the writing process. We think that writing means you sit down and just start typing. Okay. If you're typing, you're on like phase 3 or 4 already. There's so much pre-work that is part of the work. And I wanna encourage writers, adventure designers to remember that research is part of this process and to embrace that. Now, that being said, there are ways that you can take to kind of minimize this. I moved from being an editor at Paizo to Starfinder because I didn't want to learn the Pathfinder canon. That's why I went to that game. It was relatively fresh. It was only like a year or so old, and it had this big thing called the gap that we created just so we didn't have to worry about this problem, and it was empowering and it was freeing. So. And acknowledge that continuity can be a barrier to new players. Like, new people find this just as confusing and perplexing as the authors of the adventures do, and it's not always a good thing. So if you can find some little corner of your setting that you can tuck your adventure into, and make it kind of a self-contained little bottle episode, sometimes your players will be grateful for that. They may be happy because that means they don't have to learn the canon either.
Right.
Yeah, I think you just want to, I mean, it depends on your setting and what your, the point of how your adventure is. But like Jason said, you can try to create like some new NPCs, new places to try to offset some of that and be like, okay, I can do a lot of original self-contained information in here that you don't have to look, that I and the players in GM don't have to have a lot of background on, but you do oftentimes, if you are writing in a setting that is established, whether it's your own or someone else's, like, Wizards or Paizo or whatever, you do want to have some touchstones that show you that you're in the setting. So I think it's just a balance and just, and yes, research, like read. I usually spend a lot of time reading at work too, as well as writing and developing.
Yeah, I mean, so whenever I add stuff to our games, the written stuff or more world building, I mean, one thing that I do just to give myself peace of mind is that, okay, there's the canon that's written, but our universe exists as its own universe within this canon. So things can change, things can be manipulated and moved around for what works for us, right? So I only really have to keep track of the canon that is our adventures, and then if I typically am drawn to adventures that I want to research the canon for already, right? Like if I like Threefold Conspiracy didn't really appeal to me, so I didn't have to do the research on grays and reptoids and all that kind of stuff. But the Aslanti did, so I was like, okay, and then that set me down. Oh, it's like they come from Pathfinder, and so that I was excited to do that research, and I think that's really, at least when I'm writing something, I don't worry too much about being 100% in line with canon. I use that as inspiration, and then we just go from there. But I have that freedom as somebody who's writing independent of the company, that I'm working for. This is all just my stuff that's on my computer,
Yeah, if do they still have Pathfinder Infinite? What do we call it now?
Yeah,
Okay.
still that.
Yep.
Yeah.
If you're writing for Pathfinder Infinite or you're writing for DM's Guild, like you can change whatever you want. Like you can change that canon, and I encourage you to do that to fit your adventure. Like just yeah.
It doesn't matter what we print. It just matters that your group agrees
That's
on,
right.
on the basics of the world. That being said, if you're working for a publisher, you should get your facts straight.
Try.
Yeah. Right. Totally. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. We've got a lot of good ones. Maybe we can squeeze two in. So we were talking about plot hooks earlier, and the idea is like you as a writer set a plot hook that you can tug later. Well, as we know, some of these published adventures are written by a lot of people over a long period of time. So this question comes from Corey. When working on an adventure that another writer laid the plot hook for years ago, how do you reconcile what they had seeded with your own adventure writing and, inspiration?
I mean, honestly, that's a lot easier than trying to line it up with the person who wrote it a month ago and whose adventure path you're following. I mean, it's just kind of, if it's an adventure seed from years ago, then it's just the same really as any other aspect of canon. You research it as much as you can, and sometimes you can even go ask the person who put it in, because you might know them. Our industry is pretty small. They might even still be working for the same company you are. But the ultimate thing is that once you put your adventure hook out there, it is not yours anymore. It's somebody else's plaything. Ultimately, it's like the GM's plaything, but it's also the plaything of other authors. I mean, I put Strawberry Machine Cake the band out into the world, and most of the adventures past that have not actually been written by me. It's up to other people to pick up that ball and go with it. You might weigh in. I mean, if you're still around for people to ask, but that's what it means to write for a collaborative medium. It's not all in your hands anymore. It's up to everybody who sees whatever potential there might be in a plot hook, and sometimes that won't be the same as yours. It might be better. It might be you might be pounding on your screen yelling, "Over my dead body," and "What did you do to my girl?" But it's part of what it means for us to have a collaborative setting, and it's something you have to understand going into it.
All right. I do want to squeeze one more question in here, and this will be the last one. But I think it's an important part of any art to know, to talk about this part of the process. So this comes from Fisco. It says, how do you know when something you've started is a lost cause, or at least needs to be shelved for a while? How do you know when to let go?
Well, I mean, the short answer, there's the answer that you think is true, but it's not, which is when it's no longer fun. But the truth is that writing is often not fun, especially at the end when it's work, right? So that is, we have this idea like, oh, writing adventures is super fun, and it is. But when you are looking at your deadline and you're cranking out thousands of words a day, or you're revising material that you are so sick and tired of because you have stared at it for months, it's no longer fun. It's work, and so you can't just stop when it's not fun anymore. You got to complete. I don't know, Jenny, Eleanor, help me out here. When
I mean, some of that is why we have editors who just say this isn't working. What are you doing? Because I know a lot of people are just like, didn't the writer understand that this was bad? No. Once you've written on something for months and years, no, everything is meaningless. All the words are mush. Sometimes you will just go through and understand that this is jarring. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. And as much as I love it, it needs to go. But sometimes that just, and it takes somebody else to see it. Sometimes you have beta readers that you can put under NDA and they can help you spot that kind of thing. But past that, if you're trying to make something work, and no matter how hard you are trying, it's not doing what you want it to, it's not feeling the way you want it to, set it aside. You don't have to trash it entirely, but it may not belong in the thing you're working on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more likely to push through the thing or to take a break from it and then come back and try to rework it. And that might be trashing part of it and saying, yeah, I've got to get rid of this section. This isn't working at all or whatever. I've got to redo this. But I tend to not really shelve things as much as just say, okay, I need to have another, I need to take another route to deal with this. And that's, I don't know, it's really hard to pinpoint like how you know that. But like Eleanor said, editors, if you don't have an editor, like having a proofreader, have a writing group, like anything, like a friend who can just look at it and say, hey, like this is wonky, or this is like, I was confused by this, or I think this is really messed up. And that will give you that outside perspective, because it's hard to be objective about your own work, and that can work for, you might think it's really good and it's maybe not as good as you think it is, but it can also be, I think this is not good, and then other people are like, no, this is amazing, what are you talking about? Take the damn compliment, Eleanor. Take the compliment, Eleanor. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to call you out, but it's seriously, like, I have gone through this, like I have been on both sides of that, where I have thought this is really, really good, and someone else has been like, I don't know, like, have you looked at this part? And then I was like, oh, shoot, you're right. And I've also been in the boat where I was like, I don't think this is great, but then other people loved it. So,
I want to encourage writers who feel like they've hit a wall to think of the project as done. It might not have reached the conclusion of the story, but the project itself, it might be done. And that doesn't mean it's a failure. You can still learn from it. You put it on the shelf as an incomplete project, but you've learned from it and you can move on to something else. I think that we can often fall into the trap of thinking, well, if I don't finish it, then I'm some kind of failure. That's a really destructive attitude. And instead, look at that unfinished document as something that we can learn from, and maybe we'll come back to it one day. Like, nothing's stopping you, right? But for now, just put it on the shelf there and think of it as something that you trained on, you learned on, you got new skills by writing on, and next time pick something maybe a little bit smaller, a little bit easier to finish next time, and retrench.
Awesome. Well, I mean, I think that's all the questions that we can get in today. I appreciate you all being here. You guys have any parting words for future writers out there? Sounds like lots of good advice already, but give you guys kind of a final word here and we'll get out of here.
Writing's hard.
All
Try
right.
and be easy on yourself.
All right, Jenny.
just keep writing and write what you want to write. There is the balance of, trying to support yourself if that's what you're doing. I get it, but even within that, you can, just let your inner goblin out and let it play a little bit. It needs to sometimes.
If you are struggling, or you want to bounce ideas around, or you want advice, like, I am happy to help. I want to encourage anybody I can to get into this business, and it all goes around. So you can DM me on Discord. I'm on the STF server, and I will do my best to help in any way that I can.
Awesome. Well, I think that you guys just giving us this hour today was tremendous gift, and I appreciate all of you guys being here to talk about this and to talk about some of the work that you do, the good and bad of it. So that's all I got. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Eleanor.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah,
of course.
thank you.
Yeah.
What a delight to see Eleanor and Jenny again. It's fun.
Yeah, good to see you.
Awesome. Well, until next con, we'll see you. Bye, y'all.